Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time to talk a little bit about storycrafting, the art of making stories. This video in the series is a little bit of a response to one of my viewers, Giordano Severa, who is from Mexico and wanted to know how to avoid writing Mary Sue characters. So I'm going to use that as a platform to talk about three big character types: the Mary Sue, the Paragon character, and the Everyman. And one of those, the Mary Sue, is one that you are probably wanting to avoid in your writing or your story creation. Whatever format you happen to be doing it in. So let's start with the Mary Sue. A Mary Sue is a character type that is very strongly associated with fan fiction, and is sort of tropic in fan fiction. And it started with Star Trek fan fiction. There's this idea of like Mary Sue, the youngest Starfleet officer in history. Mary Sue is usually a very young character that is hyper competent, has a extreme skill set, like an extreme number of skills that he or she possesses, is able to impress established characters in a universe. So you go in and you press Captain Kirk and Spock, they're immediately impressed with Mary Sue, and is usually able to save the day using unbelievable skills and talents. And that's really the litmus test of a Mary Sue, is that the talents are unbelievable. So when I talked about Force Awakens and I did my review, I talked about Rey being a Mary Sue. And Rey really is a classic Mary Sue, and it's kind of why I felt like Force Awakens felt like a bad fan fiction film, or like a very expensive fan fiction film. Is Rey is young, she's hyper competent in everything. She makes no particular mistakes as she goes. She's immediately good at things that she wouldn't have any knowledge of, like the Force. And all of the established canon characters are super impressed with her and like her immediately. So it really, to me, felt a lot like a Mary Sue role. So how do you avoid writing a Mary Sue? Well, since a Mary Sue is usually morally perfect, and has a high skill set and doesn't really encounter obstacles in the plot, you have those things. So you have a character that's not morally perfect. A character that, especially the easiest way to have it, is a character that makes errors in judgment. Even a character that's very ethical and very virtuous can still make big errors in judgment that have negative consequences. When we watch Star Trek Next Generation, Picard is a very virtuous character. He's designed to be like almost like a paragon, like that second category I talk about, but he still makes errors in judgment and is very broken up about them and has his own little bit of his own internal flaws that he's carried over that's part of his character. So he's really not like a Mary Sue, and he's also old. He has all this experience, and yet he still makes errors in judgment. So if you have your character make errors in judgment, that's going to go a long way. Those are mistakes. Your character needs to make mistakes. The other thing is that the plot obstacles have to be meaningful. If your character's encountering a plot obstacle and that actually sets them back, it makes them think differently, it makes them change what they're doing, that's part of that character growth arc. A Mary Sue doesn't really have character growth because it's already a perfect character. It's too perfect, it's too likable, too beautiful, that sort of thing. The character has specific skill sets and lacks skill sets in other areas. They're an engineer, but they don't know about astrophysics as much as the astrophysicist does. Or they're a really great leader, but they don't know science as well as the science officer, and that creates conflict. So there's a really good way. It has very specific skill sets, or has very specific traits that are different from other people. So if your character is like intensely beautiful, they may lack in some other capacity. They may not be personable or a good leader, even though they're very beautiful. And so there's room for growth there. So as long as there's some room for growth in whatever sort of attributes they have, you're probably not going to be writing a Mary Sue. That doesn't mean your character has to be incompetent. Your character can be highly competent. But as long as that character is able to make mistakes, or there are genuine obstacles for that character to overcome, then you're not really going to be writing a Mary Sue. Some people have said and have tried to make the case, and I haven't really accepted the arguments personally, that Mary Sues can be good in certain formats. And I think one of the formats that has been talked about is media for children, because children really like to watch heroes be really good at being heroes. They like to watch Superman, in essence. And I don't know if that's really true, but I look at stuff that's written towards children that's very what I would consider good, and those characters are usually have a lot of growing to do, even as children. We understand that children have lots of growing to do, more growing than a competent adult, really. So, like Harry Potter is an example. Harry Potter, you would think he would be like a Mary Sue, or a Gary Stu, whatever male version of that name you want to have, because you start off the book with like this whole chosen one thing, the very first book, but Harry Potter is really mostly incompetent at most things. Like, he's very, very mediocre, and he has no clue what he's doing. He stumbles through things with a little bit of luck and also like some barely clever thinking at the beginning. And he's pretty good at like a couple of things, and he has a couple of inborn talents, but he needs his friends to overcome the obstacles. His friends have specific skill sets. It's a great example of children's literature not needing a hero that is like all powerful, but really creating something that's identifiable for the kids, because kids are not going to feel like they're great at everything. They don't really need a character to project themselves into that's great at everything. If they have a character that feels more like them, then they're more interested in how that character is going to be able to overcome the obstacles. So I think there's some really good examples of in children's literature not needing a Mary Sue to get kids interested in the hero. Like, you don't need that kind of projection, I think. Let's talk about Paragon characters real quick. Paragon characters are not Mary Sue type characters. They are characters that don't really have any growing to do. They are very powerful. They are maybe perhaps even godlike in some stories. A really good example of Paragon characters is like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings is a Paragon character. Dumbledore from Harry Potter is a Paragon character. Yoda from Star Wars is a Paragon character, at least from the original trilogy, he's a Paragon character. And a good Paragon character is believable because they have some other thing going for them that makes them a Paragon. They're very old or very experienced. So Gandalf is basically a demigod. He's like an angel. He's a supernatural being. And he doesn't really have any growing to do because he's basically a divine being. Gandalf is also not the main protagonist of Lord of the Rings. Our main protagonists are more human characters, even though, we have a hobbit and human, but the hobbit is a human character. Gandalf is sort of a peripheral character trying to guide things. And Gandalf's struggle as a Paragon is not for him to grow and overcome things. His skills are capped. His moral capacities are capped. It's his concern, Gandalf's concern throughout Lord of the Rings is, am I actually strong enough to overcome Sauron? Because I don't believe that I am. I believe he is innately stronger than me. So how can I possibly overcome him? Well, I will have to use subtlety rather than my power to do it. So Gandalf is also like a morally maxed out character. He's already achieved all his virtue. He doesn't have moral growing yet to do, really. And then in the movies, there's like some situations where Gandalf is like very upset that he sent Frodo to his doom, but not as much in the books. So he doesn't really have a ton of conflict over that. He's really just he has affection for someone. So Gandalf's moral growth is sort of peaked. It's the same thing with like Yoda from Star Wars. Yoda is like 900 years old, and he already knows everything, right? He's like the master of masters. So he doesn't really need to grow. We don't need him to grow. What we need him to do is to show Luke how to grow. And Luke is that third character type, which is really the everyman. So Paragon characters have a very particular place in a story. A Paragon character, you don't have to have every character have to have a growth curve. Paragon characters can exist in sort of their maximum state, and they could be trying to exert whatever virtue they have on the world. You don't have to have every character have like a really strong growth curve. However, Paragon characters don't usually make great main characters. And that's because we don't really identify that well with Gandalf. We can't really identify with an angelic being who existed before Middle Earth. There's just not a lot in common. We have a lot more in common with Frodo, right? So because Paragon characters are not that identifiable, we usually don't have them as the central characters, but they can be very, very important story characters as well. That's a Paragon. Now, I should mention also that there is a lot of Paragon characters in Japanese media and Japanese literature, and I think this has to do with just a little bit different cultural attitude and approach towards story writing. where there's a lot of stories about sort of maxed out characters who have already had their experience and already had their growth, and then the conflict between other characters as they try to achieve their ends. That is something that you can see a lot. And you could do that it's just not as popular, I think, in English literature, but it could still totally happen. Is you build up the characters to their max level. I guess a good example would be if you're like reading a long fantasy series like Wheel of Time. By the time you get to the last book, they're all paragons, right? Whatever they are, they're at the maximum level of what they are. Another kind of paragon, while I'm thinking about it, is the Emperor from Star Wars. The Emperor is a paragon. Even though he's an evil paragon, he's still a paragon. He doesn't have any growing left to do. He's already owns the galaxy. He's at the max level of whatever growth arc he has, and only his downfall will be the showing that he has flaws in judgment, right? So that's a paragon character as an example. And again, he's not a main character. He's somewhat of a static character. So last thing that I'll talk about is the Everyman. The Everyman is a character type that most people really like to use as part of what makes a protagonist happen. And you don't have to have your protagonist be an Everyman. A protagonist can have really specific character traits. But an Everyman is a character that's more gray. Everyman comes from the medieval play Everyman, where Everyman is a sinner. He makes the same mistakes we all make in overvaluing riches and friendship and undervaluing his good deeds. So when we say a character is Everyman, it's somebody that every man can identify with, that on some level represents all of humanity. I think Luke Skywalker, to a certain extent, is an Everyman. Some people have tried to make the case that he's a Mary Sue, but I don't see that. He has a lot of growing that he does, but he makes all the same mistakes that we make. He wants to do things the easy way rather than the hard way. He makes the mistake of worrying about of limiting his own potential, of doubting, of doing all these things. He has a lot of Everyman in that character. And Everyman is a character that will make a lot of the common mistakes that people make. You don't have to have a character have flaws that are like really profound and very specific. So you don't have to, it's like, I need to make a flawed character. Let's make him a drug addict, right? A drug addict is not really an Everyman. An Everyman is going to be a guy who gets drunk on Thursday and says something stupid to a girl he likes. That's an Everyman. A drug addict is going to get drunk every day and everyone hates him for it, right? That's a profound character flaw. There's nothing wrong with writing a profound character flaw, but it's not an Everyman. So the Everyman doesn't have these really profound character flaws. His character flaws are the character flaws we all have. Flaws in judgment, problems with love, doubting yourself, doubting other people, being betrayed, conflicts with family. Those are all the sort of things that are contributing to an Everyman type character. And like I said, most people want their protagonists to be highly identifiable, so they're going to give them the kind of character flaws that we all have. And that's a way that you can make your character very identifiable, even if they have specific flaws. If you give them general flaws as well, they may make mistakes about who to trust. They may not like their job, but not know how to fix it. Those are sorts of the things that people are going to really identify with your character. And I don't think every character has to be super identifiable to be interesting. It's more important to be interesting than identifiable, but the Everyman will definitely help with the identity part of your character, the reader or the viewer being able to project themselves into that situation and be highly empathetic of whatever the protagonist is going through if they have the same struggles that everybody has. Think of those general struggles. So those are my things about that. The Mary Sue is usually one you want to avoid, and you want to, instead of having a Mary Sue, you want to have a character that has some flaws. An Everyman is probably better than a Mary Sue, but you want to have their skills be specific, their flaws be of a specific nature, and also for them to make mistakes and have obstacles in a plot. So characters don't exist like in a vacuum. You don't like design a character and like, here's the character. That's something that a lot of amateurs do, is they like write down all their character traits or something like that. No, characters only exhibit themselves through a story, through a plot, through the execution of events. that's going on in your story. So because they only exhibit themselves through that, those events have to have an impact on them, and they have to have an impact on the events. So it's a mistake to just design a character outside of the plot. You have to think about how a character is going to grow through a plot. The plot is going to affect the character intimately. So keep that in mind. Those obstacles have to have a good impact on the character. That's how you're going to make it believable, even if they're a very, very competent character. And I'm a believer that competent characters can be very, very interesting as well. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can read my stuff at dvspress.com and check out davidvstewart.com for more of my general stuff and my music stuff. I'm always happy to have you along and to have feedback, so please give me comments on what you think, and we can develop these concepts a little more in depth, or come up with some better razors for determining these. I'm always happy to have those conversations. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.